We are Chris Lee, Blayne Gilmer, and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, continuing our series preview of SEC schedules. Today we get to the LSU Tigers, and boys, we look at this one. This is a dandy of a schedule. We love it. Just so many storylines on this schedule. I'm going to get your thoughts quickly on this before we dive into it game by game. Starting with you, Blayne. I think we all just kind of independently said this is a phenomenal schedule. Can't wait to see it. Certainly that starts in week one, but man, I love what the Tigers have done here, or maybe more happily what the SEC has done for the Tigers here with this schedule.
Oh, no doubt. It is a tremendous schedule and starts right off the bat with Florida State. And you can't get probably a more high profile matchup. That's probably going to be a chance of having, two top 5, top 10 teams. And then, just right into the gauntlet that is the SEC West. You throw a little Army Black Knights, some triple option in there that you got to mess your whole defensive practice schedule up. I'm telling you, I've coached football I coached for a long time. There is nothing that teams hate worse. Defensive coordinators hate worse than having to teach. You have to work on it for a little bit in the summer, all that kind of stuff. So that's an interesting wrinkle. And then, of course, the rivalry that has always been great there with Alabama, and then leading on to maybe a revenge game there a couple days after Thanksgiving with Texas A&M, Blake. So this one is jam-packed.
Yep. I mean, like you said, it's we always look at week one these days about just the high-profile games. Obviously, this was a game we had circled last year. I think we were more curious about this game last season at this time because, just kind of given where everything was, trying to figure out what you were going to expect from Brian Kelly and company. But now, Florida State's a top 5 team. LSU pretty much, I think, is, set up as a top 5 team. And so, yeah, it's just such a huge game to start the season. And then you kind of just keep going down. Certainly, I think a pretty big 3-week stretch there, even in mid-September, that Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss stretch, 2 of those on the road in Mississippi. And then, of course, you've got the usual games on there that are always intriguing with one at Alabama coming off the bye week. And, even a Texas A&M team. What do they look like at the end of the season? There's just a lot of interesting and sort of intriguing storylines, I think, with a lot of these games.
Yeah, several games on this one I love, but that first one, the Jaden Daniels, Jordan Travis showdown to get your Heisman watching kicked off right. That was, as you guys alluded to, a fascinating game a year ago. LSU certainly would have liked to have a do-over on that, especially the special teams portion. But, I mean, that is going to be – I haven't looked at the schedule nationally, but that might be the game of interest nationally, I would think, of all the things on the schedule. I can't think of one I'd want to watch more than that one, Blayne.
Yeah, who's going to be the Anthony Richardson of 2023? Because remember, after week one last year, he dazzled against Utah, and it was Anthony Richardson for Heisman. So as your point, whoever wins and plays well in this game, whether it's Jordan Travis or Jaden Daniels, they're going to have a leg up in the Heisman race going forward. And this is a Florida State team that, yes, LSU has brought back so many guys from a really a year early trip to the SEC West championship, or SEC championship, winning the SEC West a year earlier than many people expected them to. A lot of talent coming back. Really, that whole offensive line, receivers, quarterback, it's talented, but Florida State brought back just as many and even added more in the portal. So Mike Norvell has his most talented team there. Blake, it's just going to be a fantastic game to start the season.
Yeah, I'm looking at the actual spread here, and obviously, just so you guys know, we are going to go through. We'll make our game-by-game predictions next month, and of course, we'll preview this game in depth for Week 1. But I'm looking at sort of the odds, and it looks like this was actually just updated today, and LSU is, I think, a 1-point favorite in that game to start off with there. So again, we all knew. I mean, it's a 2 teams that feel very similar in terms of what they could achieve this season, and so just to have that opening up, the season in Orlando, it's just. This is what we enjoy about college football. When everybody says that, every game matters and kind of the way everything's set up, this is one of those games that means just that, because it is such a huge game to start the season for both teams.
Just means more, and Florida State's about to find out is what he's saying.
Look, they may wind up being the SEC at some point. So, I mean, they need to get used to it, right? So, I mean, all these teams out there that aren't in the SEC
in the 20-team Super League after everybody joins.
Yeah.
Southeastern 28, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Let's hit the rest of September here. Grambling State in week 2. We won't spend any time on that one. And by the way, you can see the schedule scrolling across the bottom there. I've taken an average of a couple of magazines and a couple of computer ratings I like and taken their 1 to 133 rankings, average those out. That tells you where these teams relatively ranked nationally. You can agree or disagree, but that's the opinion of some of the media so far. Let's go to those last 3 games of September at Mississippi State, where State is changing its offense somewhat under Zach Arnett after the tragic passing of Mike Leach. You've got Arkansas with Sam Pittman on the hot seat, that one in Baton Rouge, and at Ole Miss in a game that I think that has potential to be fascinating. Blake, I'll go you first. What stands out to you about those 3 games?
Well, I mean, I think this is sort of this is kind of the swing portion of your schedule, because I think these are, the 2 games, like I said, on the road at Mississippi State, at Ole Miss. I mean, this is the SEC still, right? Yes, we can say that LSU, we would expect them to be better than Mississippi State and Ole Miss. They're going to be projected higher and those kind of things, but still, it's going on the road in the SEC, and you just kind of never know. But yeah, so I think those are just 2 interesting games from that standpoint, just because, if you have that Arkansas game kind of sandwiched between, and then, oh, by the way, I mean, who knows where Missouri's going to be? I think Missouri's kind of one of, I mean, we saw it last year, guys. We talked about it previously. Like, we know kind of what I think Drink can put together there. And we saw it last year against Georgia. Could this be kind of the game where, Missouri's at home? They play an LSU team that's sort of, riding high. Perhaps they're 5-0 at the time. You just never know, I think, in the SEC when we talk about some of these road games. So I think specifically, and I know that's going into October, but I think you have to kind of look at it as a whole with the September schedule to have 3 or 4 games on the road there, and then have an Arkansas team in between it, which Arkansas's got a lot of talented players, and they certainly have the potential, to finish high, I think, in the SEC West. That's not the easiest thing in the world, just to kind of see how that shapes up with those 2 road games, or excuse me, the 3 road games if you add the one at Missouri there on October the 7th.
No doubt. I think that is a interesting portion of the schedule. You talked about looking different. Mississippi State, you can't even watch film on them, Chris, from last year, but you played them. They did not have a scholarship tight end on their team, and now they're going to have 2 and 3 tight ends at different times on the field on that offense over there with Zach Arnett bringing in the former offensive coordinator from Appalachian State over there. So it's going to be more of a pro style system. They got to prepare differently for that. Arkansas, always a physical matchup when you're coached by Sam Pittman. It's going to be physical, and they're going to bring a different defense with Travis Williams at the helm, a more aggressive defense over there at Arkansas. So, no easy week in the SEC, and of course, facing a very imaginative Lane Kiffin and a team that Ole Miss always plays better early in the season, it seems like, under Lane Kiffin. So you're catching them maybe at the wrong time. LSU definitely will be favored in all 3 of those games. I would expect going into the season, early betting favorites on all 3 of those games, but still can't take anybody for granted.
Moving into October, we touched on Missouri a little bit, that game in Columbia. It seemed like Missouri played everybody it played close a year ago, just about. So that one could be interesting. Auburn, October the 14th, smack dab in the middle of the season. That's when Hugh Freeze will be getting his team used to that new system. Potentially, Auburn could be starting to click around that time. I've said this a million times on other videos. I would rather play Auburn earlier than later, given the dynamics of that. And then Army, you mentioned that one, Blayne, just because it's a nightmare to prepare for. You do get a week off after that before November, which leads off with Alabama. We'll get into that in a minute. But your thoughts, starting with you, Blayne, on the October portion of the schedule.
Como is a weird place. I mean, weird things happen over there at Fairfield, and it is just strange. I'm just telling you, it depends on what time of day. If they give LSU one of those 11 a.m. Central Time kickoffs of how things go over there sometimes, which I can imagine that game kind of could be trending that way, boy, that's just not ideal if you're Brian Kelly and them over there. So you gotta be a mature team, and I think what LSU's going to benefit from is they are a more mature team this year. They've been around. They've been to a championship caliber environment, And that was with a lot of young players, and they got a lot of those guys back. So there are some tests here in terms of emotionally, maturity wise, and also schematically wise with Army. But I think you're talking about a LSU team that should be prepared for those tests. And like I said, we'll do full, game picks and breakdowns on those. But that is a intriguing month nonetheless there, Blake.
Yeah, it is for sure. Just to clean up the September part of it, I was going to mention this just to tie it in with this portion, but Ole Miss the week before they play LSU has to go to Alabama, so they have to go to Tuscaloosa and then come right back and play LSU the following week. And I
Get
think
your
what's interesting,
popcorn ready.
yeah, yeah. So it's not exactly a great 2-game set there for Ole Miss, but they're in the SEC West. They kind of know what to expect. But I think when you look at it elsewhere, we talk about kind of this portion of the schedule. Auburn, that game on October the 14th. Auburn gets a week off before that game against LSU, and of course Auburn before that on September 30th is playing Georgia. At Jordan Hare. So I think that at least is something for Auburn. Come in maybe somewhat fresh against LSU, but to have to play those two teams back to back, even if it's within a 3-week span, still not ideal. So yeah, this feels like the portion where, as Blayne said, just the game at Missouri, as I mentioned earlier, just sort of tying that into the 3 out of 4 road games in the SEC, playing 3 4 away there in that September 16th to October 7th stretch. That's not ideal, but elsewhere, the biggest thing for me is the one that's not on the schedule on October the 28th. Just having that bye week for the Alabama game stands out huge. So
that is huge. But if you're let's say just for kicks and giggles, LSU's rolling along undefeated.
sure.
The one thing you worry about as a coach on that bye week is making sure we don't get beat by the Baton Rouge Police Department. Okay, like just nobody get in trouble. Let's stay out of suspensions and all that kind of stuff. You got Alabama coming up, so that happens out there. So you just gotta be careful with that.
Blayne, did that happen at any high-profile SEC programs in the offseason?
Oh, listen, one of the biggest rivalries right now in college football is Georgia versus the Athens Clarke County Police Department. That's a stout rivalry going on. So
you're welcome for me putting for that one on a tee for you there. But yeah, November. We start with probably the most anticipated regular season game in the SEC this year, as we do this in June. The road trip to Alabama. I don't think that series is as weird as it used to be. Blake may have some info on that. It used to be, seemed like the road team won that one all the time. I think it's kind of flipped there recently. Florida, November the 11th. We're not high on the Gators. If it's falling apart for Florida at that point, you guys know how toxic that environment can be when it goes badly for a coach. And certainly Billy Napier did not have his first year in well. We'll be interested to see how the temperature is in Gainesville before that one in terms of where the fan base is with Napier. Should be one LSU wins either way, but that's a dynamic I think that's interesting. Georgia State. Georgia State has put a scare into some SEC teams in the past. I don't know if this is the team that'll do it. And then A&M.
They beat Tennessee in Knoxville.
They did. That was a little bit
couple
different
years
situation
ago, right?
for Tennessee. Yeah. Than it is now. But yeah, I think we're talking about a different stratosphere than the one this game will be played in. In any case, Texas A&M. Speaking of coaches potentially on the hot seat, we got the Jimbo Fisher special, the 25th. That was a game LSU lost. I don't think anybody saw that one coming. It was going poorly for Jimbo Fisher. I'll start with you, Blake. Your thoughts on the November portion of LSU's schedule?
Well, yeah, I think the Alabama game will get some attention. It's, I mean, just assume, as we said earlier, both teams could be in fine shape heading into that game on November the 4th. Elsewhere, I mean, I think my biggest question is like, what is Texas A&M going to be on November the 25th? Like, because I think last year is just still kind of burned into our brains. And, what do they look like by that point in the season? Is the Bobby Petrino hire paid off by that point on November the 25th, the final week of the season? I don't know. And so I think that's kind of one of those games you circle to, as Blayne said. Florida, I just don't have a lot of high expectations for. Georgia State, a little bit different there. And so, yeah, I mean, the Alabama game is, as we always say, it's interesting about LSU because usually we can say if you're picking one game on the schedule, circle it and say that's obviously the one that stands out the most, because we talked about Georgia, and like the Georgia-Tennessee game we thought was obvious. But for LSU, they got Florida State, they got Alabama. Like, there's not just one necessarily you're going to circle. Those two games are huge. And I think for me, just kind of wrapping up the whole schedule, they do get Auburn, they get Arkansas, they get A&M all in Baton Rouge. And I go back to kind of just that 3-week stretch. When you look at it in September, I think that is kind of what defines the season, which of course, by that point, we'll know how game one, shaped up. And I think there's so much riding on that game. And then of course the game at Alabama for LSU.
I'm going to tug at the heartstrings once again here for all you people who hate change. This could be the last time you see the annual rivalry of LSU and Florida play each other, because it's they play, they're the permanent crossover game and stuff like that, and that's likely to go away. So that's just something you got to note away here for this season. But A&M, you talked about A&M there, Blake. They were god awful last year when they beat LSU. Yep. So I don't think you can, there's plenty enough talent in terms of what Jimbo Fisher has amassed that you have to take that one seriously. I think that's where you'll see the LUC effect that I like to talk about for LSU. Liquored up Cajuns will come into play there, because it should be, I would imagine that would be selected as the night game. And we all know what happens, especially in November. You need a little warmth out there. You need a little something to keep you warm when you got a cold wind coming in off the bayou over there. Well, LSU fans can take care of that, and they will be raucous over there when Texas A&M comes into town. Georgia State is somebody that you don't want to overlook going into the Texas A&M game, because Georgia State is this program that located right there in downtown Atlanta. And Chris, Blake, they get a lot of guys who maybe don't have the outstanding measurables but are still very, very athletic, that kind of fall through the cracks recruiting wise for SEC schools. So never want to take them lightly. They're in Sun Belt now, I believe. So they play good competition over there. So I think that Georgia State game could be more competitive than the Florida game this year. Honestly, I really think Florida's down bad right now. So but that's my observation of November here for LSU, Chris.
Yeah, I'm just final thoughts on this. This is a little bit of a weird schedule. Not just the mammoth game off the bat when you see some teams in this league that don't play anyone till October, but you've got that. You've got the in-state game with Grambling, which I'm glad to see LSU play. You've got the dynamic of Mississippi State in week 3. I think the Ole Miss game could be fascinating. You talked about Missouri for those reasons. You got Army. Not a lot of teams in the SEC are going to schedule a service academy in the middle of the season. And then you get to November, you got some weird games. We've had some weird games between Florida and LSU. I think that was the infamous shoe toss game a couple years ago. The A&M game has been weird. I believe that's the game. Was that the one where they had 7 or 8 overtimes a few years ago, Blayne?
Oh yeah, it was a ridiculous. I think it was like 70 something to 60 something. It was a lot of points at the end of that one, and that's really the game I think that got the overtime rules changed. Where they started going for 2 and things of that nature after the second overtime. So
yeah. Blake, parting thoughts on LSU's schedule.
Yeah, we'll have game-by-game predictions coming probably in several weeks, as we'll really go through these, all these schedules in the SEC, pick all these games. So for now, we're just kind of doing the initial thoughts on the opponents. And so we'll have all that. Hit that subscribe button. And again, we'll be doing this for all 14 teams in the SEC.
Yeah, we are all wearing our Braves hats tonight. That was not planned, but that does lead me to a good segue. We cover baseball. We're putting this out early June. LSU still playing. We've got all kinds of previews of super regionals. We'll have College World Series coming up. We do basketball and, of course, tons of football content coming out. It's first week of June. That's really when we're rolling out most of our football content. We'll be doing that all summer. Best way to do that, to catch our stuff, is to hit the subscribe button. That and hitting the like button on these. Both those things help our analytics. And anyway, the subscribe button and notifications are good if you want to know when we are putting stuff out. So help us help you by doing that. He is Blayne Gilmer, and he is Blake Lovell in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. Plenty more SEC content coming your way very soon.